My name is Char Birch. For those of you who don't, I know you all, so who don't know me, I serve as your transitional conference minister. I want to welcome you. This is the workshop on General Synod, what is going to be happening and how we're going to do it this year. It is virtual this year, so we have some interesting things to share with you. I'm going to begin, and I'm going to just share some basic things about General Synod. I know that many of you probably already know that. How many of you have been to a General Synod? Okay, so hey, this is just a review of a few things about General Synod. And then the curiosity, and actually those of us who will be attending General Synod this year have this curiosity of exactly how this is all going to happen. But it certainly will. So can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. It's always hard to know. So a few basic things about General Synod. As you know, it happens every 2 years. And I think I always try to remind people that the United Church of Christ is based on covenantal relationships. So the local church is our basic unit in the United Church of Christ, but of course we have conferences, some places associations, and the national setting, and each of those settings are what many people would call manifestations of the church, in that each of them are valid representations and mirrors of what they seek the church to be. However, because we are based on covenant, each of those are also independent in their own way. So as we'll talk about, the General Synod will speak for itself, but it cannot speak on behalf of local churches or tell them what to do. And that's true of the conference. We cannot tell a local church what to do or how to do it. Each local church makes its own decisions about organization and worship and how they live out their sense of God's call to them. And for us, we believe that because we do believe that God calls like local churches into being. And so for local church, it's that understanding of what God is calling them to be. And no one else can say, this is what God is telling you. So it's that based on that kind of theology, and that's true throughout the church. But we have this covenant that says that we can learn and grow from each other. And God oftentimes speaks to us through other people. So we urge local churches, the General Synod will urge conferences to consider and to learn about things. So that's sort of the basic underlying of how we get organized along the way. General Synod is made up of delegates from all the conferences. It includes the United Church of Christ board, which is sort of like our board of directors that handles business between General Synods. And it includes representatives from our historically underrepresented groups. Now, just a reminder for me anyway, the national setting, the church has gone through a lot of different structures since I first learned about these umpteen years ago. So we now have a united church board. It is made up of, some of you might remember more recently, covenanted ministries, and now we've moved into a united board. So the UCC board has up to 52 members in it. So they are all part of General Synod also. You know, you can stop me at any time. We're a small group. So if you have questions, just stop me.
Sure. So
Yes.
Can you say that part again? I don't think I got it. So what board is, say that, can you sum that up again, please, for me?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the General Synod is made up of conference delegates, and then the United Church board as well as historically related groups, representatives from those. The United Church Board, and this is what some of us have had to understand to work with, actually is a unified board. So they work like the board of directors for General Synod, in between General Synod. They've got 52 members on it, and so they've got representation from various parts of the denomination. Is that helpful? Okay. Some of us remember when there were other structures. That's why I wanted to point that out.
Are you on that board, Char?
No.
So who from the Southeast would?
At the moment, we do not have anyone from the Southeast on it.
That seems a little disproportionate to have 52 members and no one from the Southeast. Huh?
Well, except that the 52 members are not just from, some of them are from conferences. They have some from our historically underrepresented groups. I'd have to go up and pull that. The next time we will, in other words, they keep track of that. So if you don't have someone on the board this time, they will seek to have someone else. And all of it comes through nominations. So we always need to be on top of making sure that we have, they ask for nominations to go into a pool of people. So when they look for members to be elected to the board, they look at that nominating pool, which I know just recently I was asked to nominate some people into that pool so that they have people to draw upon. But yeah, that's been, and one of the previous structures, it like had people from everything, but or from all the conferences, but in reality, they've, this would be my interpretation, in order to make things more easily to manage, they've tried to get it smaller. So, good question, by the way. So the number of delegates that conferences have to the General Synod depends on the overall membership of the church, of the UCC, and then the membership of each of the conferences, which is why, you know, our annual statistics, when we ask churches what their membership is, it's important that we have those, because actually that becomes a basis as they decide the proportion of number of delegates that each conference has. Now, we in the Southeast have 7 delegates, but there are a lot of varieties. In Montana, Wyoming, and in the Northern Plains, they have 3 delegates. But then you have the Illinois Conference that has 55 delegates. And you have, this is the interesting one now, Southern New England Conference, some of you may know, is made up of what previously was Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island Conference. They are now one conference. So they have 98 delegates. But, you know, it feels like, whoa, who's controlling what? But it is based on where our membership is. And I don't think I would want to organize those 98 delegates personally, but that's okay. But each delegate is a delegate. Each delegate has a vote and has the same abilities to participate fully. But that just shows a little bit of the variety of within the conferences. So General Synod, and since you've all been there, you know that it is a time for worship, for some community building, for meeting people across the denomination, which I think is always phenomenal. Time for learning, time for conducting business. And General Synod will provide the basic direction of the national setting of the church. I mean, that's where their focus is, and at the same time urge again, the conferences, local churches to consider moving, not necessarily moving, but at least considering certain things in the world as we do our ministry. So the General Synod will make statements that will urge us to consider how we do ministry in today's world. The business is conducted by standing rules, which have been based on Robert's Rules of Order. And so, as you know, there'll be motions and amendments and speakers for and against and voting and all that kind of good stuff. So this year, all of this is going to be done virtually, which means that, in fact, all the delegates have to attend a mandatory training on how to do this. I mean, basically, you're going to have 900 people involved in being able to speak, or some of them will vote. Some are like, in my position, conference ministers are what we call associate delegates. I cannot vote, but I can speak. So you'll have some people who can speak but can't vote, but you'll have like 900 people on this virtual platform. And it's been fascinating to listen to how it's doing. The platform we are using has been developed by the Presbyterian Church USA. Thank you, Presbyterians. It is something they've been sort of developing, and they used it last year for their General Assembly. And luckily, they have been willing to work with our national staff to make this happen. I'm really glad, because I think it's complicated. But they showed us a little bit of, I've seen a little bit of the platform that once the delegates register, it will all be done through a certain platform where we will be able to see everything, just like, not exactly on Zoom, but like in a webinar, we'll be able to see everything. But when it comes to voting, you will actually be able to speak for and against motions. You will be voting. And what I liked, what I saw as you were looking at resolutions, they're actually on the screen right below you, so that you can see exactly what's going on. And then you can see, you know, and of course, obviously hear the people speaking for and against. So it'll be that kind of thing that will continue. It's just all on screen. So this will be interesting. Eugenia, you haven't done your mandatory training yet, right?
I have not. I'm signed
I
up
haven't
for it
either.
for June 2nd. I have a question that just
Sure.
interested me while you were talking. When you are no longer our transitional conference minister,
Hmm?
will you still be a part and take part in General Synod? And what capacity would that be in?
No. I'm part of General Synod. Well, because of my role. Now I can go as a visitor,
Yeah.
but I become a normal person, a normal person, normal clergy, a normal member of local church. So.
Okay, yeah. Well, are you crying about that? Or are you just like, whew, done? Turn the page. Turn the page.
You're right. That's a whole other thing. It depends on the day.
She will never be a normal person.
Thanks, Dale.
Char, am I correct that in theory, you could be nominated?
Whoop, you just cut out there for a minute.
I'm sorry. That you could be nominated by Southeast Conference to the pool and might have the possibility of being, you know, that.
Sure. Sure. Just like any of us. Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Good. So anyway, let me tell you a little
Sure.
bit.
When you speak out for or against a resolution, can everyone hear you on the platform?
Yes.
All 900?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. That's what's going to be fascinating to see how they do that. At the same time, that it'll be the same platform where there will be worship and, you know, all of that will be there. But yeah, particularly that interaction is going to be very, very interesting. So the schedule then becomes also interesting because it's virtual. Usually it would be in person. You all have been there like 5 days, you know, morning till night, pretty intense. Using all those hotels and convention centers. But that's not going to quite, and then you'd have all your business, you'd have your special events, the special dinners in between, and you would have conference delegation would get together. Last time we got together at 6:30 in the morning for breakfast, and then we had after hours later on, which actually was easier for us because we're a small delegation. I've had to organize that with 42 delegates, and it's not really fun. But because we were small with 7 of us, we actually had a suite. And so there was always a place that people would gather. And so that was really nice. But again, now we're virtual, so it's going to be different. We also cover 6 time zones. 6 hours of differences. So we have from the East Coast to Hawaii. So they had to figure out how to do this so that Hawaii was not here in the middle, you know, did not come in the middle of the night or some such thing. So for us, most of our activities, most of the worship and all of that kind of stuff is in the evening. And then for Hawaii, it's going to be in the afternoon. Now, they do have a youth program, young adult program that's going to be happening earlier in the day, every day. But for us, it starts on Sunday evening, July 11th, and it goes to the next Sunday evening, July 18th. And most of those are evenings. Now, Saturday, there are some afternoons involved. But so instead of, one of the advantages this time of not being in person is that for delegates, you don't have to take your complete week of vacation to be there. Many people can work during the day and then participate later in the day. So in that way, there are some advantages along the way.
Sure. I thought we had representatives from Samoa. Did we not have, don't we go all the way to Samoa?
They would not be, they are not a conference.
Okay.
So we have connections to Samoa, but they would not be an official conference.
Okay. That's
Good
interesting.
question. Obviously, you made me think.
Yeah. I had no knowledge, so you helped me out.
Yeah. And I have no idea how this is ever going to work with our, you know, usually at General Synod, we would have international guests. And again, they would be there virtually. I don't know what hour it's going to be. So for some of us, will just have to wait and participate and see how it happens along the way.
Well, I guess if you were to travel, you go to a different time zone, so you could just make that as if you were traveling and just get on a different time zone, different times.
Exactly. I mean, even for our annual meeting, Shannon Michael Pater is registered, and he's living in India right now. So he will come in, and I always get confused. It always winds up being in the evening. I think it'll be in the evening there when it's in the morning here, kind of thing. So
Yeah, I think it's about 14 hours difference or something like that.
I have enough trouble figuring out between Eastern and Central.
Yeah.
So yeah. So this year we've got we have 2 keynote speakers. Valerie Kaur, some people know these people, who is a social activist and a filmmaker. And then we have Reverend Adam Russell Taylor, who is an author and minister. So the schedule will be, we have 2 keynotes. So on 2 of the evenings, we'll have keynotes. And then 3 of the evenings, we have worship services. And for Chris is coming in. Worship services, their preachers are Karen Georgia Thompson, who is the Associate General Minister and Co-Executive for Global Ministries. She actually is the administrator for the General Synod. And if you've not heard her, she is a good preacher. These are all good preachers. Reverend Michelle Higgins will be preaching, who's the pastor at St. John's in St. Louis, and also the executive director of a group called Faith for Justice organization. Faith for Justice organization. And then the third one, which those of us who have been around for a long time will recognize the name of Ben Chavis. Benny, do you recognize that? Nancy, do you recognize that? Ben worked for the UCC years ago, and he was part of the Wilmington 10, who in 1972 were arrested and wrongly convicted for civil rights actions. And the General Synod and our national setting really went to bat with some defense for that group. And he did, I guess it was before he was working for the national setting, but it was eventually overturned. So he now works for a national newspaper publisher association. All of this is online. There's a website, generalsynod.org. And so it has all the background of the speakers and the worship. But it's just fascinating as we hear a lot more of how they're going to do this. And the other thing I wanted to mention.
So what you said about that website, I mean, so anybody can come as a visitor or guest.
Well, no, the website gives you all the information.
Okay.
But anyone can register, but you have to pay the registration fee to be able to participate. My understanding is the worships, help me, Tyler and Eugenia, if you remember this, I think the worships will be public, but I'm not sure. Now I forget.
Can you send that information out at some point in time to the conference so
Yes.
that everybody knows?
Yes.
I'm going to try to look that up right now while Char's presenting, and I'll
Okay.
see if I find anything.
Thank you. One of the advantages of the virtual is, again, because it's virtual, you can go as a visitor. It's $100. And at that point, you are participating in everything. So you cannot speak, but you can watch all the deliberations, all the worship, all the speakers, all that kind of stuff. So I think particularly if you've not been to General Synod, it's a wonderful opportunity to get a sense of how it works. And if you have been at General Synod, it's a great chance to see, oh, how are they doing it this year? How do they do this virtually? It's well worth it, because in addition, there will be workshops. So if you've been at General Synod, you know that they have workshops like on certain afternoons or whatever. This year, they're actually doing the workshops before General Synod. So they will be like the weekend before, let's see, it starts, I think they're the July 8th, 9th and 10th. There are 50 workshops. So if you register, you can attend any of them. Some of them are sort of live with conversations. Some of them are more on demand. They're all pre-recorded. But if you register, you can, like for the next 2 months, go in and see any of those workshops. So, which is a great opportunity. You know, you can only take in so many workshops in a day, to do them anytime. And they've created a package that, now I'm going to confuse which group is doing what, but you can actually purchase those workshops for your local church. And is that right? I got two groups going on. I mean, we have General Synod, and then there's another group that's doing that. But I think so. But anyway, it is worth looking into, just as that educational part of things. Now, as you will know, one of the questions comes up, so how do we do business Usually when you go to, if you are a delegate for General Synod, you are automatically assigned to a committee. And what the committees do is they take the business of the resolutions, not all the business, but the resolutions. Resolutions come from other entities of the church to the General Synod for consideration. So it could be a conference, it could be a group of local churches, it could be part of a national setting of the church that brings to General Synod something to be considered. The resolutions are either what we call prudential resolutions that speak to our structure as the UCC and how we do things internally, or the resolutions for witness. And the resolutions for witness are basically the way that General Synod can say to society in the wider church, this is what we, the General Synod, think. This is what we have agreed upon. And this is where sometimes it gets tricky for our local churches, because they say, oh, that's the General Synod, they're telling us what to do, which is not true, but it sometimes can feel that way. I understand that. But so that witness is saying, this is what this group, this General Synod has determined. But in order to do those resolutions and to make things a little more efficiently, the delegates are put into committees and they look at those resolutions ahead of time, and they will make changes to the resolutions. They can make amendments. Sometimes there are two resolutions similar and they'll put them together. They do all that work before it comes to the whole General Synod to consider. So normally everyone would be assigned to a committee, and then there's time when they get together, they do this work before it comes to the floor of the whole General Synod. Well, this year, again, virtually, there's still a committee work, but they are allowing people to volunteer to be on a committee, not on a particular committee. They will be randomly checked. All of the, both in person and virtual, people are assigned randomly so that you get a variety of voices as they do that, looking at the resolutions. Because that's what's going to happen when it comes to the floor, and you want that variety of perspectives in there. But because they know that the committees are going to be so large, if they assign everyone, to do it virtually would be a challenge. So I cannot tell you how many they are wanting to make sure that each resolution has a committee, but the people can choose or volunteer to be on a committee, and then they're randomly put on a committee. And I would volunteer because I think it's just fascinating to see how this is all going to work. So again, that's a little different. Yeah.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I did step aside, but I thought I was hearing. So one, I understand the volunteering, and are saying that not, in order to keep the committees of reasonable size, not all delegates will be on a committee. I am likely to misunderstand, so don't.
No, that's correct. They're assuming that not everyone will volunteer to be on a committee, but they need to make sure they have enough people to be on those committees. So, and I can't tell you exactly how they're going to do that, other than they'll watch the registrations, and probably if they don't have enough, conference ministers will get emails saying we need some of your delegates to volunteer. I don't know, but I would imagine that we'll get enough. But
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, it is a little different. And then before we talk a little bit about the business, and I'll pull in Eugenia and Tyler, who are two of our delegates, and now Chris is here. Chris is here too. Yes.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Will that $100, if I just want to watch, Will that include the committee deliberations, or is that going to be kind of off to the side, private? Just wondering.
That's a very good question. I don't know. When we were in person, you could sit in on a committee to a certain point. You could sit in on a committee, but you couldn't always speak. I have no idea. I don't know. I'll try to find out. It's a good question. One other thing I wanted to mention before talking about business is some of you will remember that we always had a big exhibit hall, you know, and so in between stuff, we'd be wandering through. Unfortunately, we would pick up all this free stuff from all these groups and we buy stuff, all that kind of stuff. Well, there is going to be an exhibit hall, but I've not yet seen exactly what that's going to look like. There are other groups who have done virtual exhibit halls. So my sense is what they'll do is you'll see what the exhibit hall is, and then you'll be able to click on and go to that area. Those who are selling stuff, things might be there, or there'll be information there. I'm not clear exactly how that's going to work, but other groups do it. So some of us are going to be learning as we go, if that makes sense. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about the business, and I'm going to just start with we have recommended bylaw changes. I just want to share those with you, and then Tyler and Eugenia are going to share some of the resolutions. There are a couple bylaw changes which I find interesting. One is that they are actually removing, or this is all proposed, obviously, removing Robert's Rules of Order as the sort of bottom line of how we operate out of the bylaws, because we have standing rules, and the standing rules basically follow that, but once in a while they provide a little more flexibility than Robert's Rules does. So that's one thing that's in there. The other two that I wanted to point out, and again, if you go on that General Synod website, all of this stuff is there. So you can see all the proposed changes. But in the last General Synod in 2019, there was raised the issue of our language and our gender bias. And that because we would talk about men and women, and so the question was raised, well, what about our transgender or non-binary siblings? They're left out. So the push was to say, in the resolution from 2019 was to go back and look at the bylaws and change the language. So that's coming this year in terms of the change in language. So that in the description of conference delegates, it's amended to be more generalized and to include gender and gender expression is the term that they're using. And the same thing happens with United Church Board, and that also includes for the United Church Board membership, okay, it's amended to include gender, gender expression, and sexuality. For their quotas for the United Church Board, majority of members are to be persons, majority of at-large members are persons of color, and they require a majority of members to be persons who identify as women, interesting, and a requirement that at least one member be transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. So there'll be some interesting conversations as we try to figure out, okay, now what all does that mean? And for some conferences, they've not thought about too much about some of this. So those were interesting proposals to for amendments to bylaws. And again, you can see the exact language. I tried to sort of summarize what I was reading, but I would suggest that you go online and actually see what it has in there. Okay. Then let's look at some resolutions. And who's going first? Tyler? There are, by the way, there are 11 resolutions that are coming to General Synod for them to, and again, they are all on that website. Anybody can look at them. But this will give you an idea of what they are. So Tyler, it's all yours.
Oh no. Do you want me to just go through all of mine and then Eugenia can go? Is
Why?
that like the best way?
Sure.
Perfect. And the actual resolutions, as Char mentioned, are on the website. There's summaries, there's the full resolution. If you would like to learn more, that's going to be a great place to go. And also, hello. I don't think that I know many of you. It's good to meet you. My name's Tyler. I'm here in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm working at Circular Congregational Church. And I'm just happy to be a part of the Southeast Conference and one of our delegates. So I have a few of these resolutions. The first is a resolution for the Alliance of Associate Conference Ministers of the United Church of Christ. They request to be recognized as a formal group. It's fairly straightforward. The resolution is exactly what it sounds like. They seek to be a self-created group according to the UCC bylaws, existing to be a supportive expression of the living Christ in relationship with one another and the body of Christ in all its forms. Does anybody have any questions about that resolution, I suppose, before going too far into it? All right. The next one is a resolution to advocate and act to change the cash bail bond system to eliminate racial and social injustices inherent in the present system. It calls on the United Church of Christ to advocate and act to change the cash bail bond system in the individual states of our country to be more just to the economically disadvantaged. This is a deep system of inequity and injustice with some very intense racial bias too. There's a lot in the resolution on the history of how the cash bail bond system has been implemented. Hopefully, Char, I'm not going too far in saying that I think this is a really important resolution for us to consider, to add a little bit of bias to it. Yeah, Eugenia?
Well, I have a question about the types of resolutions. So these are all, wait, Shar, can you explain the two types and tell us which kinds we're talking about today?
Sure. So the first resolution about the Alliance of Associate Conference Ministers would be considered a prudential resolution, because that's an internal kind of thing that says how we function. All the rest of the resolutions that we're going to be talking about are resolutions of witness. So they are, again, speaking to the wider society. It's saying, this is what we think as General Synod. And I'm sure they all say at the bottom that they urge conferences and local churches to also study the issue and consider how they might address it. So for the cash bail bond system, that would be the same thing. And again, all of these come from either a conference or a group of local churches or a particular part of the national setting of the church that's working to bring something to General Synod. And so like in this case, we have a number, I know we have some conferences, local churches actually working on this to provide financial funding for people who are arrested and cannot afford the bond and therefore are jailed, but they're innocent and they haven't gone through any kind of a system at all, particularly for minor things. So I think that's where some of this is coming from. Okay, Tyler?
Any questions about the bail bonds resolution? All right. The next resolution is on protecting workers at churches and other religious institutions. It invites the UCC settings to discern and implement appropriate measures to protect their employees and to be attentive to the ways that religious freedom, including the ministerial exception defense to legal claims of discrimination, gives churches and religious institutions wide latitude in decisions impacting their employees. As I read through it, and maybe one of you understands it a little bit more, it seems to be a higher moral and ethical standard as we just consider the ways that we treat each other, understanding the history of religious freedom in America, and the ways that sometimes that's been helpful, and in other ways it's been used to circumvent many checks and balances and just ways of being kind to each other. Does anybody have questions about that resolution? All right.
I'm not sure I understand the scope of that because it seems to me it has so many different ways that it could go, and I guess it's a pretty complex question, seems like to me.
Absolutely it is. This is where I might invite you to read the resolution. They do have a really helpful historical grounding section in it where they bring up specific cases and sort of the actual case studies that led the conference. Let's see which conference this is. The Central Atlantic Conference and the New Jersey Association to bring the resolution forward. So that might help you a little bit in understanding the scope. And Char, maybe also questions about scope and things are what we would discuss as delegates and people who look over these resolutions. Am I correct?
Say that question again. I was looking up the resolution.
Absolutely. So asking questions about the scope. It's a very broad and wide-ranging resolution.
Right.
Is that the sort of thing that we would discuss if somebody happens to be on the committee to discuss that resolution?
Yeah. One of the things that resolutions do for me, I always learn a lot. I mean, I learn a lot about things that I did not know about, that's for sure. And they will have hearings. I mean, for those who are part of General Synod, they will have the committee will work, but there are also some intensive hearings where you can learn about some of the background behind what even the resolution is. Yeah, we basically know, I basically know for this one, what's just what I read. I think it's the background that gives you an idea, but yeah, because it talks about protecting employees can come in various forms and different forms of discrimination that their faith prohibits. So it'll be, again, I have to admit, I've been waiting till after annual meeting to really study these intently. But yeah.
I'm not saying that I would be a before or against this one, but it's pretty confusing to me, I guess.
To me, I'm reading it as, and I could be wrong, and this is how, we learn. It's tough for me to go through all these resolutions and see the whys and the wherefores, right? And be it therefore resolved. But it feels like to me, it's asking us to take a second look at ministerial kind of privilege as an ethical issue, that it can be used as a legal defense. So I'm not sure who it's trying to protect, but it feels like it's saying you can't always use that as a legal defense when it's a question that you shouldn't be using it for, something like that. Does that make sense? This is way different, but police protection, there's a name for that, in the immunity stuff. To me, it feels like that this is that, but in regarding ministers.
Yeah, and just a little bit of reading that I've done, it might be a little bit reversed from that, Eugenia. So it seems that religious institutions have been able to fire ministers in history for things like, and they bring up allegedly because one had breast cancer and the other was elderly. So things that are just kind of basic human rights. And that this ministerial defense that religious bodies can use to fire or terminate their ministers has actually been broadened. There was a case more recently where a couple of people who taught at a Catholic school were fired because they were considered teachers at that Catholic school and fell under the broad umbrella of minister. So it seems to be calling us to remember our history of really trying to advocate for civil rights, and including that in our decisions to fire or hire our ministers and
Wow.
people who work in our churches.
So as you point out, it was exactly opposite of how I was reading it, just a cursory reading of it. So thanks for going in a little depth there, Tyler.
Yeah, no problem.
That's going to be.
I guess you see why I was a little confused.
Yes, absolutely. And I had no idea that this was a legal defense before just a very brief reading. So I'm excited to learn more about it as well.
Is there, are delegates, at least from Southeast Conference, committed? I can't picture it. I mean, we are covenantal, we being the UCC, so that, I mean, my thought was thankful I would not have to be on this committee, and I'm not a delegate, but if I may, just because I'm going to ask to say this before we end today, the greatest blessing I have had in the UCC was soon after arrival in Southeast Conference, because I met whatever, female and so on, age, and probably white. I was a delegate from Southeast Conference to General Synod. I many others, but that really was a wonderful opportunity. But is there any pressure to of those who are members of a committee, especially or as delegates, to vote a certain way when that resolution comes to the floor?
No, we're very clear that when our delegates go to General Synod, they vote their conscience. We don't have a conference block where we all have to agree. But what we try to do, and this is the great advantages of the delegates getting together during General Synod, is that we would learn from each other. And so what are you hearing? And sometimes we would have someone come in that would represent a particular resolution where we had questions. But we've never said to any delegates, you have to vote a particular way at all. It's always your own conscience. I'm going to move us along. I'm watching our time.
I'm sorry about that.
No, I mean, this is good. And this was one of the, a lot of these are sort of interesting. So go ahead, Tyler, let's go to the next one.
Yeah, the next one is a resolution to ban the practice of conversion therapy. Conversion therapy being a medical practice that's legal in all 50 states that attempts to change or repair, in its own words, the sexual orientation or gender identity of LGBTQ+ persons, in the belief that their orientation or identity is a mental illness. It's really just calling us to work against that practice. Any questions about that resolution? Yes, it's a good question. The next one is a commitment to gender safety and equity in ministry settings. calls us to renewed accountability for the theology of equality that we have long professed, in a climate of increased violence and hatred where women in public leadership are targeted with intimidation by the highest office of government. Women in non-binary clergy are uniquely vulnerable. This resolution confesses our complicity with the systems of sexist oppression and asks the church to explore ways to promote gender safety. Any questions about this resolution? All right.
Okay, actually, Tyler, you skipped one.
Oh, I skipped one.
Becoming a church of contemplatives in
Oh,
action.
that's my last one. Sorry, I just had the tabs mixed up on my browser.
Okay.
Thank you, though. I do want to make sure that I don't miss any.
Yeah.
So the last one is a resolution for becoming a church of contemplatives in action. And it calls for the UCC to be a church of contemplatives in action, which it's pointing to our historic reputation as a denomination for its bold leadership on social justice, peace, and environmental concerns. It seeks the church's integration of action for justice alongside intentional commitment to life of prayer. It's really just balancing action with contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions about any of those resolutions? I believe those were all of the ones. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah.
That one strikes dear to me because I think we spend too much time or as a society saying, oh, we're going to, we're for something, or we're going to pray for something, or we're going to do something of that nature, but we don't ever take any action. And it's actions that really matter. So I wholeheartedly back that kind of idea.
Mhm. Well, and I think it's pushing us to ground those actions in our spirituality. So it's not just, no, that sounds terrible, not just fighting injustice, but doing it out of our biblical sense of this is who we are and how do we change ourselves inside so that we can change the world. I think it's trying to keep both of those together. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just say very quickly, we at Circular were doing, well, it was interrupted by the pandemic, but we were doing an all-church study around human migration and trying, well, really pursuing that designation of the UCC and trying to understand more about it. And as we were researching, we found several resolutions from past General Synods, which to me read a little bit like us asking a question of how we can be more understanding and more welcoming and more supportive of people who have immigrated to our communities. And the UCC just felt like a friend who had already looked at these things and said, check this out. These are really helpful things to know as you find your way. They were just wonderful to read through, to be honest.
Great. I'm glad you did that too. Good.
They're a great resource.
Okay, Eugenia.
Okay, thanks, Tyler. And I think Chris Choi, Reverend Choi is here, and I believe Chris is a delegate.
Yes, she is.
So we just wanted to acknowledge that and welcome. I am going to share my screen now. And let's see if you can see. Can you see the proposed resolutions here?
Yes.
Okay, so what I did was just cut and pasted from the website a blurb for each and highlighted a couple of words that jumped off the page at me, and I have 5, and so we'll just go through them so you'll have time.
I'm on a small monitor with old eyes. Can you blow that up just a little bit?
Should be able to. And I'm usually that person if it weren't just on my big old screen.
Okay,
is that
there
better?
we go. That's great.
Okay, and
That's great.
that puts it all on the same screen anyway. So the first one is a resolution encouraging to end 128 years of war between the United States of America and the Hawaiian Kingdom. And as I say, these all require a lot of grappling for me to get the nuances. And if you go to the website, they will have both theological framing of why they proposed this, and then a historical context that kind of explains why. So, but the resolution itself, I think it's a anti-colonial and imperial a response to that. So basically, the resolutions are that the mayors of the Hawaiian counties, the governor of the state, the United States Congress, and the US President all pay attention to these things, and quote, to begin to comply with international humanitarian law in its prolonged and illegal occupation of the Hawaiian Islands. So, Char, do you have any more context for that one? I mean, that's, to me, it's an anti-colonial resolution, which is great.
Right. Oops, yeah. I don't. I mean, I have to really study this. I was I worked in Hawaii for about a year, several years ago. I learned a whole lot, not just about the history, but the nuances. And we've, as the UCC, we've talked about the, what is it, the discovery. There are a lot of laws and understandings that have never been removed between us and Hawaii. And let's face it, our beginnings of taking over Hawaii is not a good history. And so part of that is still part of this. I know in several years ago, the UCC did an apology in Hawaii for the roles of the Congregational Church in destroying some of the well, yeah, I don't know if you destroy history, but taking away in the colonial perspective. And I think this continues it. I'm going to have to do a lot of study on the international humanitarian law.
Well, yeah, and I highlighted in the title of the resolution itself. It's considered 128 years of war, and that is very strong language. And in the resolution and some of the contextual narrative, it talks about the oppression of the Hawaiian Christians. And so this is like, okay, you've paid attention, and now really pay attention, because we're not playing about this. So that's the way I see this. I'm going to keep going kind of quickly.
Yeah.
This one is a declaration for a just peace between Palestine and Israel. And oh my goodness, if you watch news at all, you see the necessity of this. What jumped off the page at me at this one was this declaration pronounces Israel's continued oppression of the Palestinian people a sin incompatible with the gospel. So it is kind of this is a very, of course, you can see political resolution, but it really troubles and I'm not going to say challenge, but whatever the theological word for that would be, typical nationalistic and sometimes fundamentalist and mainline religious stance on Palestine and Israel, right? And some of you are familiar with what I'm talking about. So this is that, a just peace between the two, and saying, Israel, you have had a peace in this. You hold responsibility. And I'm happy to share this blurb with anybody who wants this document with anybody. It was just for to guide a discussion. Any questions so far about those two? Because I didn't pause well. Okay, my third, I got some really deep ones. I guess they're all really deep. That's why they're here. This is a resolution to declare and respond to racism as a public health crisis. So this is another way to kind of operationalize the way we think about racism, so that, because many of us, we think I'm anti-racist, I'm opposed to racism, right? But this resolution puts the idea into something that makes it actionable to me. So here are the things, here are the resolution bits of it. It's the A, B, C, D, and E. It's to raise consciousness of racism as public health crisis, to monitor and advocate for policies that work toward this, discover ways in which ministries and mission connect with this. So it's putting every aspect of the church into this. Examine radical honesty, past and current organizational policies and practices in how they contribute to create barriers to health equity and racial justice. I like that, health equity and racial justice. That's what this is. And identify current and potential relationships with members of organizations, faith-based, policy-based, advocacy-based organizations that will promote this idea, will put it forward. So I think, again, another very important one. Does anybody have a comment about that or questions? Or
I don't know if it precipitated anything from this or not, but the COVID crisis, the pandemic is illustrated this so dramatically that minority neighborhoods of all different types have had a hard time getting the vaccines or getting
Right.
health care and things of that nature that should make this just obvious.
right. I think you're absolutely right, Dale. Is COVID brought this out into our face, and we see. So this is a response to that. So thanks. I love the title of this one. I'm so glad I got who will speak for the trees. Well, let them speak for themselves. Because no, I'm kidding. This is I love the nature base, a resolution on the rights of nature. And what I pulled out, UCC has the opportunity to address our need as a church and humanity's need to change our relationship of relating to nature as an it to a thou, which is a deeper relational way to think of a person, or in this case, stop thinking of nature. I almost said as an object or a thing, right? But make it something I can relate to deeply. Thou is a kind of a deeper, more meaningful word psychologically, emotionally than you, for example, right? And so it's about deepening relationship and doing something about it, right? In relation to climate change. I find climate change is a big issue, big important central issue to the UCC, because other mainline and fundamentalist organizations don't often recognize it as such, or deny it as such. So the UCC keeps coming back to this, saying, "Well, no, all right. So now let's change how we're thinking about nature itself." So it's a different approach to this, and so you can read, yes, long history of defense of human and environmental rights. So, any comments about that? Shar, am I missing something very, very obvious about this?
As you were talking, it sort of connected to me back to the other resolution as contemplatives in action, because your folks who are focused much more on contemplation understand and grasp very strongly that nature is part of who we are, that God is part of nature, God is part of us, and there is that connection. And so that's what was going through my mind as you were talking about who speaks for the trees, and because they are part of us, kind of thing.
Yeah. And this also, it may mention it in the resolution, the long resolution itself, but it taps into our indigenous histories as well. Right. And finally, I will point out a resolution to recognize the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. And it's the actionable resolution is to acknowledge the decade itself, adopt its frameworks for addressing the issues affecting African descendant people, and promote the decade resulting outcomes for advocating the rights of African descent people. So the UN made this resolution, and the church is saying we want to acknowledge and make this part of our contemplative consciousness toward action and advocacy. So those are all that I have.
Mhm.
And I'm going to stop sharing now. We have a few minutes left for further discussion and questions.
So that's General Synod. So, a lot going on in a very different format, but still really important. So where are your questions? What did we miss that you're curious about? And again, I would remind you, anyone can come as a visitor. It's $100, but that gives you access to all of that, all those workshops and all that kind of good stuff. So
I don't think there's any way, and I registered for something in every slot, right? And this is a week-long thing, and there's some more than a week. There's no way I'll be able to do that. I'll hit my conference wall, right? And I won't be able to do it. So I'm glad I'll be able to access it later.
right. Well, some of us, when we're there in person, hit our conference wall. But, you know, they are still going to have the special events, special groups. So with those of you who attended before, you know, they'd have those special luncheons and dinners and stuff like that. They're still going on. They're optional events, so that they happen either when the other big things are not happening, but you can register to, so your various seminaries are having gatherings. United Black Christians will have their gathering. All the gatherings will still happen, most of which are free. You know, before, those of you who are General Synod, you paid because they're always around a dinner. So a lot of them you paid for those. Some are free. There are some that have a cost to them. They're not a whole lot. But some are sponsoring some lectures and all that kind of good stuff. So you also have all that other stuff going around you. And yeah, I think that's the biggest question of people's ability to keep focused. But we'll do it.
I think the General Synod is just an exciting, wonderful time for people to be together. The people you meet, the experiences that you have, all of that is so wonderful. And there is obviously some resolutions that are going to be very profound. I just hope that in the end, we figure out a way to take, many of them speak of actions. I just hope that we can actually get those to happen.
Well, and I think that's a good point. And I think that's a good point for all of us in that, again, it's one thing for General Synod to speak, but then it's something else for us as a conference to actually take what's decided at General Synod and come back and say, well, are there things there that we need as a conference to work on, or can we help local churches work on, or all that? So it doesn't just become a national statement and within our whole system, nothing else happens.
Yeah, it's got to be more.
Urging, we can't force anyone, but urging and providing resources and say, you know, we really need to look at that.
If you think about each one and the intent of the resolutions, if I think of it, I can think of ways that our local church in Marietta could take part in, involve ourselves in the intent of this. You know, we have a group for environmental justice. You know, there are things we can do that relate. As Shar is saying, I think the important thing, the challenge is getting it down to our local congregations or out to our local congregations and having the discussions take place there.
Yeah, I just don't want us to lose the link somewhere and that not happen.
Right.
I think we're probably all doing some of those things already,
Mhm.
but we always have the opportunity to do more. If we had more members, maybe we could do more, but we're such a small church, it's hard for us to take a big bite, but we certainly want to nibble on it as much as we can to have any impact we can.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the resolutions give us another way to look at it. So sometimes I think some of them bring a different depth or a different perception that even if we are doing something, it puts it in another context, which almost can deepen, even if we're not doing more, it can deepen why we're doing it and providing even a better grounding on what we're doing. So, but yeah, we do what we can. Any other questions or thoughts?
With regard to that, if I may, Dale, sorry, that I'm thankful that the point Dale made about the small congregations, of which there are so many in Southeast Conference, not that there aren't in others, but thankful to recognize that there are some things being done even as represented on this screen more than we might. It's
Sure.
wonderful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chris, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I have a question. Like, I'll really miss every morning and nights gathering in the General Synod. Like, I really enjoy that time in 2019. And because I learned a lot from others' perspective and heard their experience, and then I gained new thought and new experience by that. So for this time, that everyone will access the virtual workshop or the very different time. So do we gather like regularly, or we have time schedule?
Yeah, as a delegation, I think we have a meeting coming up as a delegation in the next 2 weeks or some such thing, the end of June. And we're going to have to talk about when can we gather as a delegation and figure out a time. So that we can talk among ourselves and get a sense of how we're doing and what we can learn from each other.
What about the time which is open for every members like of our conference who's registered to General Synod?
Well, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. What she's asking is that when we're at General Synod, you have a delegation, but oftentimes there are visitors from our conference who are there. And so the question is there and I hadn't thought about it, and why not? We could set up a Zoom opportunity for anyone who's going to General Synod as a visitor and the delegates to get together and just sort of process some things or have conversations together in some way. It's, you know,
I really like
I think it's a great idea. I hadn't even thought about that.
I really like that. I thought that was a good community. You know, they have, you know, can have the third person experience through delegates, but we still learn like, you know, many other things.
Okay, thank you. I wrote that down.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else? We are at the end of our time.
Char, has there been any announcement of, I don't know how far out they plan, surely quite a ways, I suspect, but what the next, where and so forth, the next General Synods will be?
My understanding is, and it helped the rest of you that might know this, because we could not, it was supposed to be in Kansas City this year, that they have moved Kansas City in 2 years.
Okay.
So the next one would go to Kansas City, and they basically just shifted. They had to make the decision of in-person or not in-person months ago, like last year, in order to not lose a whole bunch of money. So they went with virtual, which I think wound up to be a good decision. But then they have arranged that we would go to Kansas City in 2 years. And beyond that, I don't remember.
Well, I would love to volunteer to be a delegate in 2 years, because I have family not far from Kansas City, so I can do a little visiting on the way.
It certainly helps. I'll write that down. Yeah. Okay, well, I want to thank you. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for joining us this morning. And I hope that you'll have a 15-minute break until the next workshop, wherever you might be. And thank you. Blessings on all of you. Eugenia, Tyler, thank you for taking some time to study some of those resolutions that we have to study anyway. And glad you were here, Chris. So
Thank you, Delegates.
blessings.
Thank you so much.